The University of Louisville football team blew out the Syracuse Orange 41-3 at Cardinal Stadium on Saturday afternoon. It was a huge performance for the Cards that really wasn't even a game past halftime. Unfortunately, however, the University of Louisville basketball team dropped a game at home to Furman on Friday evening, 80-72 in overtime. We'll talk about both of those games and more on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to take this time to say thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. As mentioned, the University of Louisville football team snapped a two-game losing skid on Saturday afternoon with a 41-3 blowout victory over the Syracuse Orange, and it really wasn't necessarily a game past halftime. We're going to give the initial takeaways from that performance for the Cardinals, and then we'll transition over into some not necessarily positive news. The University of Louisville basketball team dropping an overtime thriller 80-72 to the Furman Paladins on Friday evening. We'll discuss just how this team was able to drop this game and why the team was getting outplayed on both ends of the court. And then finally, we'll transition into the weekly Monday Mailbag segment. Before we get into the content of today's show, like I mentioned, for those who are not aware of who I am, my name is Dalton Pence. I'm a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone, where I serve as both a football beat writer and a recruiting analyst. Also do some PA announce work for the university in various sports. You can follow my Twitter handle at I can't even point to the thing, at dpence_ at the image below. Also, you can follow the podcast Twitter page at LO_Louisville. So let's get right on into the show. Like I mentioned, the University of Louisville football team snapping a two-game losing skid on a brisk November afternoon. 41-3 against Syracuse. The offense scored on 5 of the first 6 drives of the first half. It was 35-3 at the end of the first half. So the game was pretty much over. We'll talk the initial takeaways, which I think the initial takeaway, so to speak, is the fact that this was the best performance of the season for the Louisville Cardinals and definitely the most overall balanced performance. So I am very satisfied with what I saw at Cardinal Stadium on Saturday, not to mention just a great atmosphere overall. Lamar Jackson getting his number 8 retired in the rafters for the rest of history, being the the second player in program history with their number retired, along with Johnny Unitas. Let's break this performance down, give some initial takeaways, beginning with the offensive side of the ball. I know statistically it won't necessarily be backed up, but I thought that Malik Cunningham had one of his most poised games of the season, and especially from a passing situation, because I think he had less than 20 yards on the ground. But he did have the touchdown, and the tone was set right away. Jae'Lyn Mitchell with a couple big-time runs on the first drive, and overall the Cards were able to get their way in anything that they wanted. They didn't extend their games of rushing for over 200 yards, but they didn't need to. I thought Malik Cunningham had his best game as a signal caller, but the statistics won't necessarily point that out. He was 13 for 18, 209 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 98.1 quarterback passer rating. You look at this game as a whole, statistically, it's going to be a little bit misleading, because at the end of the day, I thought that his reads were solid. He was making his reads. He was getting the time from the offensive line. And let's face it, we talked on Friday, this is a Syracuse defense that, maybe they're not the best in the country, but they're top 50 in almost every single category. So definitely a respectable one. Their 3 losses in the ACC were all, I think, 3 points, at least that 3-game losing streak that they had, earlier in October and so on. So Syracuse is 5-5, as well as the Cards. Offensively, not much more that you can ask from the unit. I think 3 different receivers had a touchdown. Amari Higgins-Bruce had 2. Jordan Watkins had a big one at the end of the first half. And then Tyler Harrell had a big one. Number 8 scoring on number 8's retirement day. That was pretty cool. And I think that just showed the overall depth of the unit. And like I said, I think that I'm coming away from this performance you're just satisfied. I mean, this is coming off of two very tough losses, especially the one against Clemson, which a lot of the players and the coaching staff will say, it's the toughest loss of the season so far. So, at the end of the day, you look at it, the bad thing about it is you can't necessarily relish on it a lot because you do have Duke on a short week on Thursday. The coverage this week on the Locked On Louisville podcast will be a little different. Previews will obviously be sped up in a sense. But overall, the offensive line did really well. Thought Jae'Lyn Mitchell ran the ball extremely hard, found some holes, and really made the defense pay. And the receivers did a good job of beating their men in coverage. And Malik Cunningham really, made the Syracuse defense pay. I thought his reads were solid. I thought for the most part his passes were extremely accurate. They led the receivers, especially in deep balls. And what more can you ask for than a performance from Malik Cunningham? Now, honestly, I think Malik Cunningham is playing very well this season. I know that a lot of Louisville fans will want to give him flack for making a couple mistakes here and there over or under throwing guys. But I think fans need to realize that, post Lamar Jackson, he's coming into a situation to where you have to replace the greatest player in program history. And right now, Malik Cunningham is second in program history in terms of touchdowns, being responsible for just passing Chris Redmond for number 2 on that list this past weekend with, I think it's 89 touchdowns. But overall, very solid on the offensive side of the ball. But I was more so impressed with what the Louisville defense was able to do with the Syracuse offense. As mentioned, the number 3 ranked rushing offense coming into this game, led by Sean Tucker, who had the second most yards in the country, and then a dual threat quarterback in Garrett Schrader, who had 13 rushing touchdowns, held them to 3 points, and that was huge. I think it was under 150 yards of rushing, so that is a win. This Louisville rushing defense is getting better each and every week, and I feel like, at the beginning of the season, the issue was, okay, how are we going to stop the run? Well, I think Louisville's doing that, and it really forced the Syracuse Orange to remain one-dimensional because we knew that they weren't necessarily a great passing team, and that showed on Saturday afternoon. I mean, I think they only had 46 passing yards on the day, and they were trailing for most of the game. So I thought that the defense really made Garrett Schrader pay. Not a ton of missed tackles outside of the field goal. There weren't really any opportunities to score for the Syracuse Orange. So ultimately, I mean, you can't really you can't fault them for this performance. I thought that this was a great overall around performance, the best performance of the season in every facet of the game. I thought that the Cards came out early. They scored on 5 of the 6 drives in the first half. They handled the little things well, the things that we talked about. Okay, they need to handle the turnover battle. 0 turnovers on the day. They don't need to get penalized beyond reason. I thought they did really well in that aspect. Didn't allow big plays on the ground to Syracuse, that a team that executes their game plan really well. And I thought that Louisville just overmatched them from the beginning. I don't think even Scott Satterfield said in the press conference, I don't think anybody came to the stadium realizing that this was going to be a blowout or predicting it anyway. And the Cards really hopped on early, and they, the good thing about it was the first half was so good that they didn't really need to do too much in the second half. And I mean, they only scored 6 points in the second half, but that was beside the point. They were up by 4 scores, going into the second half. But very good performance. They will now turn their attention to Duke, a 7:30 kickoff. Or 8 o'clock. It's one of those two. Thursday evening kickoff in Durham against the Duke Blue Devils. So we'll have all that coverage here plus more as this week goes on. Before we get into the basketball side of things, I want to talk about our friends down at PrizePicks. If you're a college football fanatic or even a college sports fanatic in general, this is something that you need to pay attention to. It's daily fantasy made easy. I love it, and I know you will too. PrizePicks is a leader in college sports daily fantasy, offering more college football players than anyone in the world while offering all of the star players in the Power 5, as well as mid-major players you may never even heard of. And it offers any props you can think of, from yardage to touchdowns, even interceptions thrown. All of those that deposit and use the promo code LOCKEDON will receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. So here's how it works. You basically pick 2 to 5 players and over/under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's literally just you versus versus the computer. And you can, do mixed sports interest as well. So you can take the over on Stephen Curry and combine that with the under on Patrick Mahomes in the same entry. Use the award-winning app today on both the App Store and Google Play. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. PrizePicks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. So don't hesitate. Check out PrizePicks.com and use the promo code LOCKEDON, or go to your App Store and download the app today. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. So transitioning, we're now talking about the Louisville basketball loss to Furman on Friday evening, 80-72 in overtime. And, this was a tough – I was actually in attendance for this one. And this was just a tough one to dissect because, I don't necessarily want to overreact to this game because it's November 14th. It's November 15th. It's the second game of the season. The Cards turn around. They'll play Navy tonight, who has beat Virginia, and we'll talk a little bit about that matchup on Tuesday after that game is played tonight. But overall, when it boils down to it, this is just a matter of I thought Furman played better on both ends of the floor. Furman's head coach came out after the game and said, they pretty much had us beat in terms of size and at every position, but we still out-rebounded them, and they out-rebounded the Louisville 43-41. Louisville just didn't necessarily execute on either side of the ball to their capacity. In my opinion, we start out on the offensive side of things. I know that, Louisville was said to have brought in, a handful of good shooters that, at their previous stops, Noah Locke, Jared West, Matt Cross, guys that can shoot 40% from deep. And like I said, I don't want to overreact. I know it's early, but I'm just kind of calling it like I see it. I mean, against against Furman, 7 for 29 from deep. They shot 24%, and Furman shot 12 for 28. I know that, the past two games, the Cardinals haven't shot necessarily all that well. I don't necessarily think that's going to be a trend as the season progresses. But at the end of the day, when we look at this game in particular, this is a program that was supposed to have brought in, big-time shooting, and it necessarily hasn't, shown on the court yet. But I definitely think that that's going to be the case. I think that the rotations were another issue on the offensive side of things. I think that without Chris Mack, we had to focus on this point. Chris Mack is suspended now for the next 4 games. He did have the 6-game suspension, having served 2 already. So Mike Pegues is kind of operating on the fly, and it was already going to be tough to find the rotations early in the season anyway for Chris Mack, let alone now having an acting head coach. So I think a lot of that was trying to see where the chemistry was coming from. The only concern that I did have was kind of going away from the hot hand when a certain player was scoring. I thought Jae'Lyn Withers had a couple instances, Noah Locke, et cetera, where players were finding some success and then they were subbed out, which I get it. I mean, at the end of the day, I know that this is a more of a fast-paced approach on both ends of the court. So guys get tired easy. It's very early in the season. You have to get your fitness down, so you're trying to get more guys in. But right now, I think it's just a matter of finding the best rotation that gets you, an opportunity to win in these types of games. I think the execution just failed in a sense. Offensively, there was missed layups. Like I mentioned, they didn't shoot the ball well from deep. Ball movement at times was very condensed. There was a lot of passing around the three-point line and not necessarily getting into the zone. And we mentioned that size mismatch disadvantage, so to speak, that Furman had. Louisville, I don't necessarily think really exploited that, so to speak. Thought Sam Williamson had a tough game. Jae'Lyn Withers had, some points in this game where he looked absolutely brilliant. Jared West as well, Noah Locke. It was just kind of one of those games where no one really played well, and they played a team that is extremely balanced, can shoot the 3-ball well, veteran-led, and it just wasn't Louisville's night. And then overtime, Furman went on a 7-0 run to start the overtime period, and Louisville wasn't able to answer or respond in a timely manner. So they ended up losing this game. It's the first home loss in November since 1972 for the Cards. Defensively speaking, there were some open shots, some missed assignments. Furman shot the ball really well. You can credit to them for making their shots, and I thought that it made life tough for Louisville with their delayed handoffs and switches up top. I thought that they were getting their guys some open shots, and they were making them and getting to the free throw line as well. So defensively, I didn't necessarily see a ton of pressure. Turnover-wise, 12-7 in terms of Furman leading. Having more turnovers, I should say. Sorry about that. 12 turnovers there. Shooting free throws were pretty much, in terms of being the same. Field goal percentage the same as well. It's just a matter of Furman making more plays. There were some opportunities in that game. Furman went on the big run to start the game, went up by, I think it was like 12 or 13, maybe even more. Louisville came firing back due to good defense and making some shots, but the Cards were not able to get over the hump and put this game out of reach. They were flirting with 3, 4, 5, even 6-point leads at times, and Furman kept battling their way back. And at the end of the day, Furman was able to make the run at the end, tie the game up, and push it overtime to where they had all the momentum and ended up getting this game on the road, which was a big win for them. For Louisville, I get it. It's early season. You don't want to panic, but I find it very challenging to not call this a bad loss just because, unless Furman gets ranked or, makes a tournament, which they might. I mean, they're a very, very solid mid-major team. I thought that was kind of understood coming in. The general consensus kind of knew, hey, this is a pretty solid squad. But at the end of the day, I thought that Louisville should have won this game by about 12, 13, maybe 15 points. It was just a matter of lack of execution, so to speak. So we look at this from a offensive and a defensive side, collectively, I think that the effort's there. It was just a matter of, some self-inflicting mistakes, trying to push the gun too much in transition at times, and just making some poor shot selection. But the Cards weren't able to hit shots. They were out, hustled on the glass, and at the end of the day, they lost. I'm not going to really sugarcoat it more than that. Looking forward to a Navy team that beat Virginia in the first game of the season and then turned around and lost to Virginia Tech by 20. So at the end of the day, it is going to be a very solid matchup for the Cards. They're going to have to turn their attention, but I'm not necessarily concerned just yet. I think it opens your eyes more than anything to, hey, if you play bad like you did against Southern, you could lose. And ultimately, unfortunately, that's what happened for the Cards. And I think it can be kind of cliche saying this, but the Cards just got outplayed on both ends. I'm not saying it was more of an effort thing, but in terms of execution, in terms of decision-making, the Paladins were at the forefront and leading this at the end of the game. So I think that, that ultimately led to the loss on Louisville's home court. But let's transition over into the Monday Mailbag segment of the show like we always do. Before we get into that, I want to talk about our friends at Built Bar. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, I'm telling you, you're simply missing out. For me, a protein bar, it's chalky, it's waxy, it's hard for me to eat. I just kind of have to scarf it down. But a Built Bar is soft, it's covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you taste it, you just get the vibe. You're eating something different. And get this, it's an experience, but what I tell people is, yes, you have the flavors and all the good, benefits there, but the healthy aspect of things, it is low carb, low calorie, low fat, low sugar, high in protein. You get all those healthy benefits as well, on top of just being plain delicious. Another great thing about Built Bar is the wide variety of flavors. My favorite at this point in time is salted caramel, but they have anywhere from double chocolate, mint brownie, coconut almond, raspberry, cherry barcia, coconut, etc. This month, Built is coming out with new limited time flavors every 3 to 4 days, so check their website out often. You don't want to miss out. Go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off of your first order. Once again, that's use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at BuiltBar.com. So what we do every week on the first episode of the show usually is host the Mailbag Monday segment at the conclusion of the Monday episode. I've got a couple questions asked from the audience of some fans that have sent them through Twitter DM. And if you have a question that you would like answered on this segment, be sure to DM me at the handle above in the graphic, or you can DM the podcast Twitter page at LO_Louisville. There's a couple questions that I really thought were interesting in this one, but let's go ahead and get right on into it. The first one has to do with the football side of things, and I didn't necessarily know how to answer this. It is, why does Malik Cunningham get so much flack when he makes mistakes, but doesn't get the credit when he does great things? This is a complex issue because, I can't speak for the rest of the fan base. I think everyone has their own reasoning. I think number one is because he's not a traditional pocket passing quarterback. So, when he's over and underthrowing guys, I get it. It can look bad, and sometimes the guys are wide open. So, it's not an aesthetically pleasing type of play. So when he misses a wide open throw, it's like, man, what are you doing? But at the end of the day, I think that expectations are already sky high because he's like the true, first, permanent replacement outside of Lamar Jackson in the program's long line of quarterbacks. This is a program that's had Chris Redmond, Stephon LaFours, Teddy Bridgewater, Brian Brom, then Lamar Jackson. So the expectations for quarterbacks at Louisville are extremely high, and rightfully so. But it really appalls me, the fact that Malik Cunningham has been this solid, especially this season. I don't think he's getting his credit this season. I know that there's been plays to where he's still growing as a signal caller, still growing as a pocket passer. He still has times where he doesn't make his reads quick enough to where when his first read hasn't been there, the play's kind of broken down in a sense. But I thought this year's been a little different. Obviously he's been very successful, second in program history in touchdowns responsible for. That doesn't come without being a very, very talented player. We know how solid he is on the ground, but I think that he's grown tremendously when it comes to passing the ball. Whether that is just making the reads, speeding up those reads and trusting them, or just, in terms of being more accurate on the deep ball. I think that he is coming to terms and getting a grasp on his strengths as a signal caller and playing to those strengths. And you got to credit Scott Satterfield as well for designing the offense around his strength, as in an overall grand scheme. So, I think it's just a matter of, it's hard to make this fan base, truly happy. They're always going to find something to complain about. And I'm not, saying I'm exempt from that. I've had my times where I'm like, just always complaining about something random. And I think that that's kind of the world we live in today. So I would just really go out and say that it's more so, just kind of missing some open throws. But Lamar had times where he missed open throws. Teddy, Brian Brom, Stephon, Chris Redmond. Everyone makes mistakes. But I agree with this question. He definitely deserves more flack than he deserves. Well, he doesn't deserve as much flack as he gets, I should say, and he deserves more praise for this solid season he's putting together. One of the best, overall bodies of work in the 2021 campaign out of any ACC quarterback. So the next question, this is an interesting one because I was kind of pondering this one at the end of the Furman game, and this is, does Louisville truly have a number one scoring option in basketball? And I had to think about this one because I went back and forth. Part of me thinks, okay, this was a team that probably was never going to have a true bona fide number one scorer like it did last year with Carlik Jones, and it has in years past with Jordan Nwora and company. But it also has, a couple players that can average over 15 points a game. Noah Locke hasn't necessarily shot the ball extremely well, but he's shown that he can score the ball in bunches. When he gets hot, he can be a microwave level scorer. Jae'Lyn Withers as well. No one has necessarily played all that good, to be honest with you. So I think I'm not necessarily comfortable answering this question yet. I'd say after the Michigan State game in early December, I think we can start to piece together an analysis of this question when we have a little bit of a bigger body of work and a bigger sample size. But so far right now, I think we're too early into the season. Today is game 3. I will tell you, my eyes are on, Noah Locke, Jae'Lyn Withers. I think those are the two candidates that can be number one scorers on this team, and they possess the skill set to do so. It's just going to be a matter of shooting the ball better and getting to their spots. I think, Noah Locke's had some pretty good looks. Shots just haven't been falling. And Jae'Lyn Withers as well. I'd like to see him, abuse some more mismatches when he has smaller guys on him. But as of right now, if there is any number one scorer, then it's Noah Locke or it's Jae'Lyn Withers. But we'll see if they can be able to put it together. But I think that the talent is there in that overall sense. The last question of the segment is, will Louisville become bowl eligible? 2 games left on the season. The road game against Duke this Thursday, and then next Saturday, not this upcoming Saturday, but the one after that, hosting Kentucky in the Governor's Cup, I should say, for Senior Day in the regular season finale. I think that the Cards achieve bowl eligibility. I think that they go 6-6 by winning this game against Duke and losing to Kentucky next week. Duke has shown instances to where they can compete with top teams in the ACC, so to speak. But I think that the Cards are playing really well, and I think that they carry this momentum into the short week. So ultimately, I think that the Cards end up with the victory here. So overall, talked about why this was the best game of the season for the Louisville football team. Talked about why it was just a matter of lack of execution on both ends of the court, resulting in the loss to Furman last Friday evening. And we always conducted the Monday Mailbag segment. Great stuff there. Want to appreciate you all again. I want to say, thanks for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that it is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. A couple quick shout outs. The first one to the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast. The most recent episode dropped last night, recapping the win against Syracuse, previewing the Duke matchup. Check that out at cardinalsportszone.com. Also want to give a shout out to the Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis from Lee Sterling. You can get that on the Odyssey app or wherever you like to get your podcasts. Tomorrow, going to be a little bit of a recap against Navy. We'll begin our preview for the Duke Blue Devils and all that good stuff right here on the Locked On Louisville podcast. This is going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Everyone have a great start to your week, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.